Okay, the country may be rocked by political uncertainty, yet Thai stocks have, in U.S. dollar terms at least, outperformed its peers in major Asian markets such as Japan, Hong Kong, and Australia so far this year. But that may change if the CEO of Asia Plus Securities prediction comes through. Asia Plus is Thailand's second largest securities firm, and its CEO says that stocks may suffer a correction in the next 3 months. He says Thailand's economy is still in recession, and there's been no change in its economic fundamentals in the past 5 months. So how do you explain the benchmark indexes at more than 30% gain so far this year? Well, Asia Plus says that stocks have gained mainly because some investors missed the bus and are trying to catch up before they rise even further. Macquarie Securities also has a bullish view on the stock market. It expects the SET index to go up by another 12% by the end of this year as the economy starts to improve. Now let's talk to someone else who seems pretty bullish on Thai stocks these days. We're joined by Andrew Stotts, the head of Thai research at CLSA in Bangkok, and his recommendation back in February to buy Thai banks has been spot on so far because banking stocks are the leading gainers as a group on the benchmark SET index so far this year. And Andrew, you also have the title as being the #1 ranked research house on Thai stocks by Institutional Investor. Welcome back to the program, Andrew. Let's get your stock picks in just a bit. But first, let's go broad and talk about the Thai market as a whole, because I've been talking to Macquarie, I've been talking to JP Morgan. They seem pretty bullish on the SET index, predictions for maybe 650 by year end, 750. How do you see things?
Well, I'm long-term bullish, but right now I would say I'm defensive, and part of the reason why is because oil is such a major part of this market.
Unfortunately, we have lost Andrew. Our satellite signal has gone down. We'll try to get back to Andrew as soon as we can. Okay, Andrew, let's see if you can hear me this time around. Andrew, please continue your thoughts in terms of your outlook for Thai stocks. You said you're recommending a defensive play right now.
Yeah, my point is that oil is a major factor for Thai stocks. It's about 50% of the market. So we've had oil up by about about 100% over the last 6 months. So you've got to be careful that the energy sector just can't go much further unless we have a steep rise in oil. So really, you have to allocate to the other major sector, which is banks.
Okay, but before we get into banks, let me just bring this up because it did make headlines recently, especially over the weekend. We saw 10,000 Thaksin supporters taking to the streets, staging their largest rally since the riots that we saw back in April, which resulted in a state of emergency being applied. So let me ask you about political risk, because there are some investors who are still worried about putting their money into Thailand because of those specific risks.
Yeah, I mean, my view at this point is that things have stabilized, and part of the reason why is because, number one, the party that broke away from Thaksin, the Phumjai Thai party, has no benefit of breaking up this government at this point because we're just about to start dispersing major infrastructure funds, and they will get a big chunk of that to disperse. The second thing is that the PAD, the yellow shirt protesters, are now basically forming their own political party and coming into the process. And the third thing is that the Prime Minister is offering to consider changing the Constitution and other things that are to some extent placating the red shirt protesters.
Okay, so I guess political risks have been subdued. Let's talk about banks. You mentioned it, financials are still your pick, but they've come a long way so far this year, rallying in the session. In fact, they're the best performer as a group on the SET index. So what makes you think that there's still more gains to be had if you invest now into these stocks?
Well, I guess the first thing you have to do is you have to decide about your view on oil. And our view on oil is up a little bit from this point, but not much more. Therefore, the energy sector is hard to see it go much higher. So that leaves you only with the other largest sector being the banks. Now, the point is that 3 of the banks, the higher risk banks, KTB, Thai Military Bank, these banks have actually been up by more than 100% over the last 6 months. Whereas the top 3 banks have been up by about 40%. So the truth is that there's still more to go for the top, the major banks in the market.
How much more?
Well, I mean, I would think that we've got probably 20% more or something like that over the next 6 to 12 months, because these banks are in good shape. People are afraid about NPLs, but I think in the next month or so we'll see that NPLs aren't a major issue for them. And basically what we'll start to see eventually is loan growth starting to rise.
Yeah, there is this fear about the rising bad assets at these banks. What makes you so sure that they're not going to come through? These NPL levels aren't going to go much higher from here. You know, Thailand is in a recession.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I think that we're probably bottomed as far as the economy is concerned. So that makes me a little bit more comfortable. We're not going through a further free fall. The second thing is that the main hit on the economy happened in the export sector. And the export sector had been enjoying a fantastic, profitable time over the last few years. They hadn't been borrowing a lot of money. They'd been financing it with their own profits. So I don't think we have a major risk there. And then the third thing is that, you know, if you go out around Bangkok, as I go out all the time, basically you'll see is that we are not in a desperate situation. I was here in 1997, and I tell you, consumption was a disaster. At this point, it's down, but I don't think it's a disaster.
Well, Thais are pretty relaxed. So, Andrew, let's talk about, you know, I guess on a peer comparison with Thai banks compared to the rest of the Asia Pac. Because you hear a lot of bank analysts who say, you know, Chinese banks are probably the most insulated and probably have the best bets domestically within their huge market. So how do Thai banks compare to the rest of the Asia Pac?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. You have a much more favorable environment in China as far as loan growth in particular, and because of the government spending and how that's stimulating the economy. Thailand doesn't have that situation, so we're not going to see major loan growth. We'll probably see something like 5, 6, 7% over the next year or so. But also we have to highlight that these banks are very, very cheap. They're trading on about 1.3 times price to book versus regional banks trading on something like 1.7, 1.9. So I think that there still is some value there. And there's a lot of political discount, too, obviously, on Thai banks.
And a possible upside of 20% in the next 6 months, according to you, Andrew. Let's move on and talk about the, I guess, the energy stocks, because you said oil prices and energy prices really play a big part into the Thai market. So let me just ask you about which energy play specifically in terms of which sort of energy stream are you recommending for investors?
Yeah, I mean, basically there's a few different parts to the energy sector in Thailand. And our focus is really on PTTEP and this